Welcome to Colourful, a podcast where we explore how race shapes our experiences. I'm Stacey Jane, a white woman and mom of two living in Cape Town, looking to challenge the systems of privilege.
And I'm Sena Zungu, a black woman living in Johannesburg, passionate about interrogating power dynamics and the intersection of identities. Our vision? To spark candid and open dialogues for a more equitable and inclusive South Africa.
We're not afraid to have uncomfortable conversations because we believe that complacency only perpetuates injustice.
Ultimately, we aim to bridge divides through empathy and understanding. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but at least we're doing it together. Welcome to Colourful.
One of the things that we've observed is that when we kind of explore content for our different episodes, a lot of the time the content stems from either personal stories of our own or from people who have engaged with us once they have started chatting to us about our podcast content. You see, sometimes the stories sound like they're really funny on the surface, but when you start unpacking them in just a little bit of detail, you realize that there's some very strong racial undertones that sit behind some of these stories and make them the opposite of funny. So our story today is actually one such story. And I'd like to hand over to Sena to introduce what inspired the content for today's episode.
Yeah, Stacey, as you mentioned, usually these kinds of dynamics pop up in social situations and they seem funny. But, upon reflection, they point to something deeper. So this particular episode was inspired by, a few weeks ago, I went to a picnic with some friends and we went to this really cool park in Lone Hill. But as we were obviously just, chatting, the issue of our school days and upbringing comes up. And we reflected on how in school we were often misnamed, or like the way in which our names, they were just so botched. It was absolutely ridiculous. And a friend of mine said that they will never understand how white people can pronounce tsunami, but can't pronounce tsebo. And we were like in stitches. Like it was so hilarious. So fast forward to a few weeks later, last week I attended an event and the ultra-talented media personality Maps Maponyane was on stage speaking about how he came to be known as Maps. And his name is Masejo. And he detailed how when he was growing up in school, teachers and students would have an issue pronouncing Masejo. They would say Masigo. So, in an effort to circumvent that, he was like, okay, I'm going to go by my surname, which is Maponyane. And when his friends would introduce him to parents or anyone else, they would be like, hey, mom, dad, this is my friend, my Punani. And again, he had the whole room in stitches, right? So these conversations, this misnaming or mispronunciation, it's funny and we poke fun at it, but it really got me thinking about a deeper dynamic there, and an underlying dynamic that ties in with the race relations in South Africa and how African ethnic names are sort of framed. And I wanted to explore that on this episode today.
Excellent. Thank you. So joining us today with a Master's in Political Studies, which has been recognized by the South African Association of Political Studies as a winner for Best Master's Thesis in exploration and focus on the politics of identity, belonging, and how Xhosa widows navigate citizenship, is our guest today, Gcotyelwa Jimlongo. Gcotyelwa, it's so lovely to have you today on the podcast. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and specifically why this is an important topic for you to speak to us about today.
Thanks so much, Stacy and Sena, for having me, first of all. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys. So just interestingly, of course, understanding the topic and everything, the mispronunciation there as well, Stacy. Yeah, so it's Gcotyelwa Jimlongo. I have a master's in politics. Like you said, I explored, identity, citizenship, and how just Xhosa widows navigate their lives. But right now, I'm currently in the civil society space in Johannesburg. But I've always really been interested in, identity, how we come to be, how we navigate life, particularly as Black African women. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, a little bit about myself. Yeah.
Can I interject, Stacey? Because I'm so glad you brought it up, Gcotyelwa. Leading up to recording this episode this morning, Stacey and I have been exchanging voice notes and she has been practicing because of what this topic is about. It was very important for her not to mispronounce your name. And I think in my advice to her, I said to Stacey, it's your pronunciation. We can acknowledge that there's some words or some sounds just don't exist in English phonetics. But it's not about that. Like, you not being able to say it or pronounce it exactly how it is. It does not point to you inherently being problematic, but the effort that comes with it and sort of how you are framing or how you're taking on that mispronunciation or your ability to even like try. So I knew as she was getting on here that she would probably not get the pronunciation right, but I thought we could just like poke fun at it, but also show, acknowledge that that's not what this episode is about. It's not to necessarily expect that everybody can
Yeah.
pronounce everything, but we're looking at it like on a deeper lens about what the dynamics that sort of happen there. So it is hilarious, Stacey, that your pronunciation is not spot on, but I must say that you wanting to
Yeah.
try and it being important to you, I think sets it apart from anything that could, be offensive.
Absolutely. And also, like, just to add in there, Sena, as well, like, it wasn't like not offended at all, trust me. But really, like, exactly what Sena was saying, like, for me, the biggest thing, even about my name, has been that people actually make an effort. Yeah. So, yeah, love it, here for it. Yeah.
I'm going to try one more time. Okay. Gcotyelwa.
Yes, that's chef's kiss.
Okay, well, I am very grateful, and also thank you for the grace that you just spared me with there. But at the same time, like I really do acknowledge the importance of names, and getting it right is important because that is really the purpose of what we're doing here today. So, speaking of which, have you ever had your name totally messed up in its pronunciation, and how does that make you feel?
Absolutely, a lot of times. I mean, also, like, for me, I grew up, in East London, went to an English Afrikaans primary and high school. Most of my teachers were, Afrikaans speaking. So you can imagine how often my name got mispronounced, particularly as a young child. And so I grew up, being called all sorts of variations, Gcotyelwa, Gchelwa, yeah, different kinds. But to me, interestingly, so for example, in grade 6, I then had an English teacher. She was really one of my favorite teachers ever in life, Mrs. van der Merwe. And she then started calling me Miss G. And it kind of stuck. And so even to this day, I'm called Miss G by a lot of like my close friends and people who know me quite well. But when that started, I never really took it as a sort of, mispronunciation or anything to have, negative feelings towards. I kind of took it as, oh, this is a term of endearment that, she'd, give me this nickname. And I think that's the same kind of principle I apply even to this day. I love when people, make an effort to say my full name and when they learn. The only thing that's really usually the main point of uncomfortability is when you tell someone your full name and then they're immediately like, "Oh my gosh, I could never be able to pronounce that." And then it's an immediate thing of, you've closed off yourself from even learning. So for me, that's really the main thing. If I say it to you once, you try. I can see the effort put in there because I mean, it is important. It is my name. But also, by the same coin, when people call me by my full name, I'm always kind of like, whoa, what's happening? Because I'm so used to people calling me by some other nickname. So it's been an interesting journey with that. Yeah.
So Sena was chatting to me saying that she was discussing with a colleague how ethnic languages often carry familial connections and ancestral heritage and personal identity that you can't really translate or just doesn't really happen in the English language. In Zulu, we say sawubona. It's a greeting, but it's also saying hello and I see you. And I see your lineage, I see your humanity as someone who has spent a long time, or at least some time, analyzing identities and more specifically Xhosa identities. Could you help us understand the significance of ethnic names and why the mispronunciation, or worse, I guess, like renaming it or giving somebody a brand new name that is not of their birth? Why is that so harmful?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a huge thing, right? I mean, naming As well, it's like it's a big part of our identity. It's who you are, it's how you present to the world, it's how people come to know of you in the world as well. Which is why it's such a hurtful thing when someone doesn't even try, to put in the effort. But I mean, for example, in my MA, when I was, studying Xhosa widows and the navigations of citizenship, one of the main things that I do as a sort of strategic response to forgetting people's names and of, making that point clear, I use iziduko, which are clan names, to actually use as pseudonyms for the women that actually participate in the study and that speak to me. Simply because, first of all, of the linkages that iziduko provided me with within the community that I was studying. So I gained, better access because I could identify myself as uMasithathu. Then they would also then know me and know my upbringing, know where I come from. And so just using that example, it's not just a name, right? Your name can tell us who you are, where you come from whom you come from, what your community is like, and things like that. And so it speaks to a much larger thing of, all of the connections we have ancestrally with people within our families, within our communities right now. And that's why I think for me it's so important to not only assert your name and who you are, but to also keep reminding people that, it's not just something that we can skim over, not take the effort to learn. It carries a large history to it. Yeah, hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I must tell you a story, again, one of those stories that are kind of funny in the moment, but sometimes have underlying dynamics. About a week ago, I was with a group of women. Some of them were black, some of them were white. And we were just having general chats. And at one point, one of the black women spoke to another black woman and said, "How come you have this English name that doesn't speak to anything of your past?" And the other black woman said, "Well, my mom just liked the name." She said, "I just like the name." And she said, "Oh, shame." So there is so much more in that many black people's names carry, and that's such a it's a beautiful topic to discuss with people, and such an easy, hey, how are you, and also what does your name mean? Like it's a great way to connect with people, because there very often is a lot more behind a name than simply my mom liked the name.
Even in Gcotyelwa was touching on clan names, and in Zulu we call them iThakazelo. And every time somebody sees my surname or sees Zungu, it's not the actual, like maybe not the Senamile, but the Zungu, they'll be like, Makwabini, Sengwayo, Nyamagaishe. And that is an acknowledgement of, like, I can't even stress it. And I've made connections with so many people, and in meaningful connections based on that surname, because they understand the gravity of it, and they see just beyond the greeting. They see a whole lineage, an ancestry, a history, and that is so impactful.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, Sena. It's also it's about situating you within a broader history, right? Like we can talk about, your lineage and whatever, but saying, oh, Mazungu, now someone is able to put you into a broader context of, oh, these were these and these people. This is how they used to live. These are the kinds of people you come from. And that's so important. And I know for me, it's actually reminding me, Stacey, what you were saying about the English names and things like that, because I have two older brothers, and they both have English middle names. And I don't. I'm the only one of my siblings who doesn't have an English middle name. And I was actually named after my dad. So my dad is Mxolisi, and then I am Nomxolisi, which is sort of the, I don't know, maybe woman equivalent. But also Uno, a lot of the times as well, it's like mother of, and not just in like sort of feminine presenting way of it, but as like, mother of peace, and like, owning it, and recognizing the respect of that, the gravitas of that. Yeah, it's quite a thing.
What we're discussing here, and just to go off exactly what you just said, it's so difficult to translate directly into English. Even as you're speaking about it, describing it, I feel like I know that and I understand it, but to be able to relate that in English is so difficult, because I'm not sure it's actually capturing the essence. And I think even, the dominance of English and how it's kind of like its role as well, in kind of diluting culture, or being imposed as a sort of superior language. It's difficult to describe those sentiments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Sena, I think that's exactly right. And there's probably another step to that, which is that if we're talking about what's difficult, is obviously it is difficult if you've been speaking English your whole life to learn a new language, and specifically the phonetics in the language, the 3 clicks. Those are different. They require some effort. And so rather than take the effort, it's easier to just skim it over and do something else. What is that other thing, Sena, that some white people do that is very hurtful?
So, Stacey, I've thought about this a lot, and I know Gcotyelwa just spoke about some of her siblings having English names. That is the case with me. I have an English name, which I like. I'm actually a little bit ashamed of it, because the context at which it arose was my parents came from an era where having an English name was what Black people needed to do to have some sort of agency over what they're called, because they found themselves being misnamed or given any name by white people in this country. And if you really I've heard so many stories of still to this day, domestic workers who are with their employer for decades, and they're known as Mavis or Precious or whatever generic name, and the family don't even know their real name. So, there's the story. A friend of mine worked in Grahamstown and worked at one of the old establishments there. And she worked as a waitress, and she met this lady, and she asked her, like, what's your name? And she goes, my name is Mavis. And she says, well, what's your real name? And she tells her real name, but then also says that she didn't start out as Mavis. The name that she had chosen to give her employers at the time was something like Precious, for example. And they had a previous employer named Mavis, and thought it would be too difficult to remember that her chosen name is Precious. So they just named her Mavis anyway. And I think that's so indicative of the history of colonialism still being carried on. Misnaming and basically stripping someone of the identity is what the colonizers relied on to subjugate Black people, and to see that legacy still persist in the form of names. It's why we say it's actually violent. It is so harmful. So, Gcotyelwa, these stories that I'm speaking of misnaming and, Black people sort of getting English names as a means of getting agency over what they're actually called before being called anything else. That's just some observations that I've made. Have you experienced anything like that? Or can you touch on any stories of something similar? Because I don't think that South Africans really take this seriously.
Definitely. I mean, I think also an interesting story. So I recently joined like a hockey club, but in a very the club itself is particularly, predominantly quite white. And so I found, and it's been, a couple of weeks now, I think well over a month, if not 2 months, that I've now been playing for this club. And it's been the most difficult time. Whenever I've been introducing myself, I'll say, Gcotyelwa or whatever, but when you need to actually participate and interact and be on a field and be calling each other out, it's quite difficult, And I had this specific instance happen to me where one of the ladies was, oh my gosh, that's going to be so hard to remember. Is there another name I can call you by? And I was like, yeah, it's always kind of, I mean, that's my name. You're going to have to learn it. But then I found myself in that instance saying, oh, you can just call me Miss G, or you can just call me Do. Because there's also a place, I think, in your life or in particular experiences where there's a bit of like resignation, if I can call it that, where you can always be like, no, my name is Gcotyelwa and I stick by it, and your personal politics with that choice. But often there comes a time in life where you're just like, oh my God, like just to get through this and just to get someone to actually remember me. Because the big thing also about having a difficult name is that you also get erased in the process, right? People will misname, mispronounce, misspell. That has all sorts of implications. Then this means that, if you were speaking at a particular engagement, someone will be like, oh yeah, like that girl who spoke on this, but oh my gosh, what was her name? It was so difficult. And then your contributions are no longer known. Or someone will misspell your name in an email, and then that might go to might not even land up in your inbox. There's so many small or rather big implications that seem small in terms of mispronouncing, misnaming, misspelling, that really end up having like big ramifications. And so sometimes you just like, call me G, call me Miss G, not because you necessarily want that to be the case, but because it's just easier at that time, which I've battled with quite a bit, towing the line between standing up for my name and the importance of that, and the gravity that it holds and what it means, to also wanting someone to be able to say my name in a conversation and not wanting to have this whole big debate about why my name matters, to debate over why my humanity matters, and to put reasons as to why that's important. So yeah, it's a tough thing. And so I get where the whole, where the lady you were talking about, Sena, where, she just it ends up happening, right? She started out and she was saying, I'm precious. And at some point, people just started calling her Mavis, and that's then been her reality all these years. There comes a point where you're also like, oh my God, I have to explain my name again. It's tiring. Yeah.
That's really big. Some of those words that you use there actually cut me right in my heart. Like the truth is, not bothering is a statement in itself. That's not an option. Not bothering or saying, can I rather, if it means you're having to repeat your name 5 times so that someone can say it back to you, exactly like you guys did to me earlier, so that someone can say it back to you and correct it. And that's saying, I see you. That is saying, I acknowledge you. And taking steps to identify the fact that you are an individual. You're not just, you come with a story, you come with a history. There is so much in a name and in your name and who it is to you. So not bothering is the exact same thing as saying, I'm not willing to look into what it looks like to integrate with your race and my race. It's exactly the same thing. Apathy is not not getting involved. It's the exact opposite. And yeah. Oh, that made me very sad to even hear that those kinds of things happen, which we all know do happen. So it seems to me that the starting point of this is a desire to connect. We spoke about it earlier. Sawubona, I see you. It's a desire to connect, and I think everything can happen from that point on. And guys, it it is uncomfortable. Of course, it's uncomfortable, but not going to uncomfortable places is where we stay stagnant and where we accept the status quo, and that in itself is a statement. So. Yeah, and it can be such a wonderful way with connecting with people, not only in the name itself, but in asking about what your name means. People can ask me what my name means. Apparently, it's short for Anastasia. Not in my context, though. My parents just thought it was a nice name. So even I have a little story to tell, although not very much. But there is always conversation in a name, and I think it's a lovely place to connect. Do you have any other sort of thoughts that you can share with people around how we can use names to connect better?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm one person who's always had a very difficult relationship with their name. It's always been like just just a weird thing to navigate, particularly when you've grown up in particular spaces, you've needed to show up in a certain way, and just having introductions themselves can be quite, points of anxiety. Like, oh my gosh, now it's my turn to introduce myself. Will they even, know how to pronounce it? Will they know how to write it, etc.? But now, like, I think maybe as well with growth and just understanding myself better. I mean, I've used my name to even flirt, for example, shamelessly so.
Yeah.
where if I'm meeting people for the first time, I use it as an opportunity to, it's a conversation starter now. And they'll ask me, oh my gosh, that's, interesting. What does it mean? And I'll share the story, and it's a good conversation starter. I think what you said is so important, that we're all striving for those points to make connections. And it's when someone doesn't actually, rise to the task or be open-minded to that, where it's really a point of disrespect. And it's quite, ignoring my humanity. And so that's exactly what it is. So when I walk into a space now, I'm like, hi, I'm Gcotyelwa. And, if you're curious, then I'll tell you more. This is what it means. And that's really been the point of connection for me. And that's been the mindset shift for me as well. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question.
So beautifully. Thank you. Gcotyelwa, thank you for joining us today to discuss the importance and the gravitas behind names and why it matters to say people's names, and why it matters that you feel uncomfortable and say people's names and go there and ask about names, because it is a sign of I see you, I acknowledge you, and we are all we are striving towards a one humanness. This is what we need to do to connect with people. So I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you for joining us.
We hope that you enjoyed the episode and encourage you to subscribe to our Colorful podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, with episodes out every 2 weeks. Please rate us, comment, and share with your community so that we can keep the conversation going. Until next time.